Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 69. Empathy begins within. So as you know, all month we are taking a deeper dive into the concept of empathy, what it means, what it doesn't mean, how to practice it, how to get better at it, and what are the normal obstacles to expressing empathy. This week, I want to get into what I think is one of the biggest foundational pieces of the ability to be able to feel and express empathy to others, and that is learning to do that for ourselves and give that to ourselves. So as you've heard me say before, most of this work, guys, is an inside-out job. What we want to give to others, first we must give to ourselves, or it's not possible. But before we get all into that, first want to express a huge thank you to those of you in so many countries who are tuning in and loving the podcast. It's so good to know that it's helping more and more people every week. So that's great. The other thing is, several folks have asked me to put together some Q&A episodes for questions that come up pretty frequently. So I have plenty to choose from in my own heart, things that people ask me all the time, but I really want to put this out to you guys and ask you, what are some of your questions around taking ownership of yourself, around boundaries, around understanding you, around personal growth? So all you need to do is hit the show notes at ownitpowercast.com and go ahead and hit the email link there. And I will respond to everyone personally that I can, but I'm also going to answer viable questions on upcoming episodes. So that's pretty cool. And I think you would advance for your help. I think the more we help each other, the healthier we become, right? So let's dive in, shall we? Empathy is really about understanding, right? It means noticing with an open heart and an open mind. It means, I think, observing with curiosity, not fear. Remember, because fear is limiting. Because we're afraid to look. I personally think that empathy combined with self-compassion is necessary for healing and to be able to provide compassion, grace, and empathy for others. So validation of their pain must first start with validating your own. Without it, I bet you probably struggle with perfectionism, judge yourself harshly, have a harsh inner critic, berating yourself when you make mistakes. Because what that is conditional worth, right? It's based on conditional self-worth. Like if I didn't screw up, I'm okay. If I didn't make a mistake, I'm okay. It's conditional upon something outside of me to be an okay person. Not only is that not true, but it's an awful way to live. And those of you who struggle with this, no matter where you are on that continuum, right, know exactly what I mean. Because it's a lack of self-acceptance and understanding. So I think this makes it almost impossible to not be critical and harsh with others. Even if you never speak it, it doesn't matter. To expect them to just do better without maybe seeing their underlying struggle. Without understanding that context that we talk so much about here on the podcast. So to not have empathy for their context because you haven't even grieved your own. That's the kicker. Whatever we have not allowed ourselves to look at, pull the curtain back on, grieve, sit in the deep shit, and feel and heal, we are not going to be able to do that for another. It's too uncomfortable. It's too close to home. So therefore, our only resort is to then end up projecting our own not good enough onto others, even if we swear we don't. We can only judge in another what we secretly judge ourselves for. Now, here's a caveat. I'm not talking about not having some kind of judgment for awful things that people do, like murder and rape, and people don't care about others. So there are some instances in the world where we should have disdain and not give grace to bad behavior, right? We don't want to co-sign bad behavior. But here's the thing. Remember, we can hate the deed and have understanding that hurt people, that people who feel really good about themselves and who are humble and are mindful and self-aware and have healed a lot have no need or desire to want to hurt another. In fact, they become more altruistic and more caring about the world. We know that. If you really want to get better at validating other people's joy or fear or wonder or confusion, their deep despair, their sadness, you must first get in touch with your own. Now, of course, if this were easy, we would all have done it yesterday, right? There are some real obstacles. The biggest one is not feeling ready to face it. It's too vulnerable. It's too here, right now, real. And it's just too scary. Like we've talked about before, you can't do this work alone. You would have to get some help and support and love around you to do that. Feeling too overwhelming, too awkward, too scary, don't want to touch it. So there's the biggest obstacle. The second obstacle is maybe you have people around you, which is probably the case, that they're not doing it either, and they would be really uncomfortable with it as well. So you want to look around you and think about who in my life would support me doing this deep healing work, right? Let's say you know deep down you're not ready to maybe uncover some old trauma or wounds, but there are things you can do, and we'll talk about it later in the podcast, to get this at least started, things you can do every moment, every day. What we're talking about is understanding and acceptance for yourself. And remember from last week, focusing on the whole picture, the whole story, all the context, not just taking a snapshot, but looking at your entire context. Now, there are plenty of episodes on childhood stuff in this podcast, and I encourage you, if you need to, go back and listen to them again just to refresh yourself and see what maybe needs to be healed. A good way to tell is, like right now as you're listening, what's coming up for you? This is ridiculous. I don't need this. I've done all that. I'm fine. I've survived. Or, yeah, I'm really in touch with what I'm feeling most days and what I've walked through in life. And I've really sat with that and understood it and have a lot of self-compassion around it and caring. And I've shared it with others who really care. And I've validated a lot of that pain and so on and so forth. All right. So take a moment and think about where you are and just be honest with yourself. When we think about extending empathy to ourselves, it's really what we talked about last week about showing empathy to others, doing the no wonder. Remember, no wonder you're feeling A, B, or C, right? No wonder you're feeling sad. Your best friend just moved away. No wonder you're pissed. Someone just really violated your boundaries. No wonder you're excited. You just got that new job you've been waiting for. No wonder you're exhausted. It's COVID and we're all exhausted, right? No wonder, no wonder, no wonder. What that is saying in essence is there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. You can, yes, trust your feelings. You can trust that that is what you feel. Now, you get to evaluate that later, like we've said before, whether you want to determine that that's over the top, it's disproportionate, what the hell's going on with me. That's great. You can evaluate that later, but only you get to evaluate that, remember? First things first, you have to accept that's what you're feeling. That's what's going on for you. And remember, you can have some crazy conflicting feelings too that make no damn sense until you back up from the portrait and like, oh, okay. Now I see why moving to a new city is both exhilarating and exciting and scary and sad because I'm leaving my old neighbors behind. If you're a grown-up, you have more conflicting feeling days than you have cleaned one feeling days, trust me. So telling yourself you're making total sense because give the why, give yourself the why. I understand how you feel. You're just telling yourself this in your heart. Put your hand over your heart at moments and say, it's okay. I understand what you're feeling. You're in a tough spot. I can feel the pain that you feel. I wish you didn't have to go through that. Or you're so relieved it's finally over. Or you're so hopeful now and that feels so good. Or you're scared as hell. Or you're worried about the future. You're worried about your kids. You're worried about yourself. So really just validating, you're holding up the hand mirror for yourself and just saying, this is what I'm noticing. Now, again, if you grew up in a great, healthy family where people did that for people, right? They said, oh, I can imagine how excited you are, or how hurt you are, or how frustrated you must be. And gave you the vibe that that was okay and you can trust your feelings and no one's judging what you're feeling or what you're sitting in. In fact, there's compassion. Even if you screwed up, they would say, I can imagine you're really beating yourself up right now. I imagine this is hard for you to accept that you blew it. But we still love you, and you can make this right. So if you heard that, that's great. But I want you to think back for a moment on all of your relationships and kind of evaluate, how often do you hear that? Did you hear that? Do you get the vibe? Did you get the vibe? That what you thought and felt and think and feel is valid because it's yours. And other people get it, and you're not alone, and you're not crazy, and you're not the only one, because we need to know that too. Why do you think support groups work when they're done well? Because that's what's happening. You're not the only one in the room who is dealing with X. You're not the only one in the room who is feeling A, B, and C and struggling with A, B, and C. When we can get to relaxing into some self-trust, the neat thing is, an ironic thing is, that's when we start making shit happen. We start taking more responsibility for our behavior. We make changes we need to make. We set boundaries we need to set. Self-acceptance first, guys. Then behavior change happens. We cannot shame ourselves into any good behavior like Brené Brown says. It won't happen. So one of the wonderful resources, there are many. If you go online, there's plenty of stuff out there. But Kristen Neff is a psychologist and a meditation teacher, and she teaches about self-compassion. She has her own story around it. She's such a gentle teacher. She's got tons of resources out there. This link that I have, I will definitely put in the show notes, but I also encourage you to check out more of her material. I've learned a tremendous amount from her, and I'm just really grateful for what she gives to the world around this. But she talks about self-compassion, and I'm going to share a little bit from this and what her definition of self-compassion is. She said, think about what the experience of compassion feels like. First, to have compassion for others, you must notice that they are suffering. If you ignore that homeless person on the street, you can't feel compassion for how difficult his or her experience is. And then second, compassion involves feeling moved by another's suffering so that your heart responds to their pain. The word compassion, she said, literally means to suffer with. And when this occurs, she says, you feel warmth, caring, and the desire to help the suffering person in some way. And she says it also means you offer understanding and kindness to others when they fail or make mistakes, like we just talked about, rather than judging them harshly. And then finally, when you feel compassion for another rather than pity, it means you realize that suffering, failure, and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. And then she quotes, there but for fortune go I. She's really big on, instead of really being hard on yourself and judging yourself and criticizing yourself for your inadequacies or shortcomings, Self-compassion means you're kind and understanding when you're faced with your own feelings. Now, remember, this is not condoning what we did, perhaps. This is totally separate. Empathy first, boundaries second, you've heard me say. Empathy for yourself first. You must be really upset you blew it. You blew the interview. You feel devastated. Of course you do. You are really looking forward to this. Just really giving yourself some love for a moment. Only then, maybe tomorrow, you can look at, okay, how did I screw that up? Like, what could I do better? We will get into the solution. We naturally want to be solution focused, but first we have to have self-compassion. So she talks about there are 3 elements of the self-compassion. The first one is self-kindness versus self-judgment. Self-kindness versus self-judgment. Self-compassion is being warm and understanding towards yourself when you suffer, when you fail, when you feel inadequate. Don't ignore your pain or beat yourself up with self-criticism, okay? She said self-compassionate people recognize that being imperfect, failing, or experiencing life difficulties is inevitable, okay? And that acceptance is huge there. It helps us feel so much more like each other than alone. The worst feeling that people say to me is feeling set apart or I'm the only one. And when they stop feeling that way, healing starts to happen, guys. I see people magically start changing. This is big stuff. We can't always get what we want. Perfection doesn't exist. So being kind to yourself versus your self-judgment. So this is what I tell clients to practice is, okay, when you first realize that something just awful just happened and it was your fault, the overwhelming shame is going to try to swallow you. So I want you to tell your subconscious, which wants to get the hell out of here or fight, say, it's okay. Calm the amygdala down. It's okay. It's okay. Nobody died. It's okay. Calm it down. Then your second thing you're going to say to yourself is, okay, you probably screwed that up because, right? You were too busy, too distracted. You had a rough week. You got a lot of shit going on. This is not condoning, guys, but it is understanding. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You can compare it to other times where maybe you would have been more on point. Like there's context here. And it's not like you're not taking responsibility for the context. So it's okay. And this is what happened. And then number 3, okay, what am I going to do to fix this? Let me immediately take responsibility. Make the amends to people I need to make amends to. Don't forget the ones to yourself. If you procrastinated and got yourself in some hot water, apologize to yourself. And then try to make good on changing that, right, as you go. Okay, so number 2, she says common humanity versus isolation. I kind of touched on that a moment ago. She says there's this irrational but pervasive sense of isolation as if I were the only person suffering and making mistakes. Intellectually, we know that's not true. Try telling your heart that at these moments. We have to remind ourselves that being human means vulnerable and imperfect. And that personal inadequacy, everyone feels it. Everyone feels it at one given moment or another. If they say they don't, they're lying, okay? The more people you talk to and the more you share with them and they share with you what's really going on behind closed doors, you will start to see very quickly, oh, you are much more like other people than not. You will be amazed at the humanity. I mean, that's why she calls it common humanity. And I agree with Kristen because I've sat with enough clients to draw conclusions that there's so much universal stuff we walk through. And with a few exceptions, most of the people I sit with are very good people who are struggling for very good reasons. And they really wanted to change and get better. So do you see how we're much more like each other than not? So the third one she called mindfulness versus over-identification. Because she says self-compassion means a balanced approach, right, to our negative emotions, that our feelings are neither suppressed or exaggerated. So I think it was Brene Brown who said, don't minimize it, Don't over dramatize it to get attention or sympathy. Just call it. Just call it. What is it? What is it really? Like my mentor says, she's like, what is it? What are we looking at? And what is it really? So we're being as emotionally honest as we possibly can. And you can feel in your gut when you're making more of it or minimizing it, right? So relating our personal experiences to those of others, she says, who are also suffering, thus putting our own situation into a larger perspective. It's non-judgmental, it's receptive, it's open, and observes thoughts and feelings as they really are. At the same time, she says, mindfulness requires that we not be over-identified with thoughts and feelings so that we don't get caught up and swept away by negative reactivity, right? Where you get in like a swirl for 3 days and can't come out or can't get out of bed. Yeah, that's not going to serve anyone. All right, so Kristen Neff, self-compassion. And one of the things she teaches is put both hands over your heart and look down and close your eyes, breathing in and out, and just giving yourself some self-love. Remember, just like when you're having a great day or you did something really well, you're a much nicer person to be around. Doing this self-compassion, self-empathy work and loving yourself is so important. What I tell clients is, you were supposed to get this growing up. You're supposed to get this right now. And especially if you didn't, you got to give it to yourself. And you got to give it to yourself first. Because a lot of times what happens, and we've touched on this before, is we don't give this stuff to ourselves. And so we drain, especially our partners, because we want it from them. And yes, we do need mirroring and empathy from each other, but we also have to give it to ourselves. The other benefit to that is if you don't work on your self-empathy, you're going to push it away when others really try to genuinely give it to you. You're not going to know how to respond to it, or you're going to minimize it or say, oh, no, I'm fine. When someone says, oh my gosh, I can't believe what happened. How are you doing? You must really be struggling. No, I'm fine. I'm good. And you blow it off, you step over it, you change the subject. So there's a bunch of reasons why we need to do this. First, you're going to need to do this to do any good work on yourself. Second, if you want to show your kids and your loved ones empathy, we got to start on the inside. Doesn't mean we don't practice empathy on the outside with them, like we talked about last week, of course. Because if we're not ones to typically do that, it's a whole nother language, right? You got to get used to it. You got to make it more habitual, make it more genuine. One of the biggest benefits of doing this work, though, I think, is that your self-trust increases. Trusting yourself. When you trust your feelings and you validate where you are and you decrease your anxiety because you don't have to fight yourself anymore and you don't have to question your sanity or what you're thinking or feeling or needing or what you just walked through, right? So that increases your self-trust. So anxiety and depression come down. You're going to be less foggy-headed, less distracted, less swirling and ruminating and up at night and all that fabulous stuff because you're not going to need to. You're dropping into what you're feeling and why that's valid. So you're not going to be running from yourself, running from your feelings, running from your reality. You're going to feel more grounded and confident. Others are going to, I think, start to notice that you're going to seem softer and kinder and more open, even if they really can't put their finger on it, right? You're just going to put out a whole different vibe. Intuitively, people can feel it from us. So those are some of the great benefits. Now, you're like, what are the consequences, Mara? Well, here are some tongue-in-cheek consequences, I guess. I mean, one of them is you're going to start making big changes in your life. And that's going to bring some chaos, perhaps, initially, and you're going to really take a hard look at what you've been settling for. You're going to look at your relationships. You're going to look at everything. So if you want to have a consequence, that's one of the biggest ones that I see. It's a tongue-in-cheek consequence because ideally, we want you healthier and happier anyway. But the obvious part is, once you validate yourself, you're going to want things in alignment in your life. we really do yearn for our insides to match our outsides, I think. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with someone and they did some healing work. Then weeks and weeks later, they're like, I just cleaned out the whole house and painted the living room because I just wanted to look nice, Mary. You know, I've kind of let it go. I was kind of neglecting it. Yeah. I see it. I see it in those ways. I see them take big risks and change things in their life. I see them want things to be congruent. All right. So how do we go about working on some of this, right? I have 3 areas where you can start to do this. I mean, there's a million ways to do this, but if you wanted a place to start, here are 3 of them. The first one is just create a daily habit. I have clients do this all the time. I call it a habit of mindfulness. So whenever you can grab like a few moments throughout your day, some clients create like an alarm on their phone to remind them, or do, the same times every day if you can, just to take a moment. Go in the bathroom, lock the door, have a seat, right? Take a moment. And the more often you do this, the better. But let's be realistic. Do it 3 times a day to start. Anything above it is gravy. If you have something huge going on, probably more often. So the first thing you sit down and ask yourself is like, okay, what's going on? What am I feeling? Like, am I furious? Am I angry? Am I annoyed? Am I confused? Am I freaked out? Am I sad? Then the biggest part is, why does that make sense? Take me out, put some other fabulous person worth their salt in my place, not someone who is emotionally immature and acting out and all that. No, maybe someone you look up to and have respect for. Why might they be feeling what I'm feeling and why? Like why does that make sense? Like, validate it. Like, why? And why is that logical? So that way you are not questioning what you feel. You're checking it out. Now, again, you're checking it out whether you're minimizing or over dramatizing, right? We're doing that too, which is good. Next, I want you to ask yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need? Do I need to cry, to vent, to stop? Do I need to own my feelings? Do I need to go say no to something or someone? Do I need to take a break, a nap? Do I need someone's shoulder? What do I think I need right now? You're owning what you need. Because believe you me, not doing this, we will definitely act out and put it on others. So it's always better to take responsibility for what we need. So finally, what do I need to do to take care of myself? So I recognize what I need. Okay, I need to set a boundary somewhere, even if it's with me. Even if I've just put way too much on my plate today and I'm stressed out and I'm frustrated and my head hurts. Okay, I need to say no to me. So it's not just setting boundaries with others. It's setting boundaries with ourselves. Acknowledging that maybe we're exhausted and we're tired and we're just not functioning well. So this is where you detach, you notice, and you validate what's going on emotionally and cognitively for you. And of course, then you're going to separate that out from whatever boundaries or acceptance that might need to happen. And again, we're not condoning bad behavior. We're not condoning ways we've failed or messed things up. We're simply providing the context and compassion for ourselves first. Because again, nothing changes in a shame spiral, trust me. Just more shame, more acting out, more destructiveness. And we're not very nice to people around us. Do that for 3 weeks, a couple times a day. I want you to see what happens. Just check in with yourself. Now, of course, ideally, sharing your heart with someone else is awesome. Journaling this, if you don't have that, is wonderful. You're just making your truth really real by letting another person know how you can validate your own feelings. And if you have a good, healthy friend or partner or therapist, they can certainly corroborate that for you. And that's just so healing. The second thing you can do, which is powerful, you're probably going to cry. Male or female, you're probably going to cry the first couple times you do this, and that's okay, is to write what I call love letters to yourself. Once a day, whatever time of day works, pick a time where you can have like 15 minutes alone in case you are tearing up a little bit or it brings up emotion. But at the top, I want you to write the word dear and your name. So I would say like, Dear Mary. Then depending on the day, right? Like what's going on, you might start with a few phrases such as these. Dear Mary, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this is happening. Hurt yourself, hurt you by fill in the blank. Dear Mary, no wonder you're feeling A, B, and C, because it makes sense that I'm noticing that. It's okay. We need to recognize the we is you and yourself. So these letters are validating you. And here's the thing, and here's what everybody says. It will bring up stuff that you didn't even know was going on for you. It's amazing. Even people who have done a lot of therapy and a lot of work, these are extremely powerful, especially if you struggle with self-forgiveness. Remember, you're not condoning bad behavior, but you're forgiving yourself, you're providing context, and you're taking responsibility for what you want to do next to fix it. So that's good because you are taking ownership. And finally, if you think you have some deep grieving and healing from childhood, from a year ago, it doesn't matter. It is important not to try doing that by yourself. I don't think any of us should do that work alone, nor can we really do it thoroughly. And having others provide the empathy for you that never happened when the hurts originally happened is huge. It's really, really important, especially around deep wounds like big losses, even smaller ways that you've harmed and hurt yourself over the years. I encourage you to find a safe person and do that with. I recommend a professional or support group because, your friends might just be a little overwhelmed if you've got some big caca back there. Okay. And you can kind of beta test that, or maybe you already have, and they're like, whoa, you need to take that somewhere, girl. All right. So deep grieving and healing, if doing some of this self-empathy brings that up, that's okay. You just know that when you're ready, you need to go. I don't want that to stop you from doing the daily check-ins and the letters because you're going to have to do that anyway. Going to have to do it anyway. We all do. And it's so helpful. Mindfulness is the big thing now because it's so helpful. It is just acknowledging without judgment. That's interesting. Look at that. And then combined with self-compassion and empathy, huge. If you do nothing else, I've said, in the work, do the grief work, do the empathy. Everything will change for you. And even if you've done the past work, do some empathy for what's going on for yourself today. Again, this is not sitting in a pity party. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Because empathy will help you take better ownership of yourself, not less. All right, so today we talked about how in order to feel and express genuine empathy for others, we first need to be able to do this with ourselves. Because that self-empathy and that self-compassion, I think, are the foundation of being able to pull it off with other people. And what's really neat is it'll start happening organically, at least in your heart, where you really feel compassion for others and you're a lot less likely to judge. The 2 exercises that we talked about today, along with the link for Kristen Neff's stuff, are going to be available to download when you subscribe to the weekly newsletter. And if you don't already get the newsletter, go to ownitpowercast.com, hit the show notes. It's right there. Newsletter comes out to you once a week, every Tuesday, and you can connect with this podcast there. You can get the blog, you can get the news, all of that. All right. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about this episode or any others, hit the show notes and hit the email and email me. I'd like to hear from you. May you stay healthy, grounded, and love you this week. Hold on to hope. Focus on self-compassion this week. And try to work on compassion for others. All right, so take good care of you. Pay it forward. Keep focusing on you and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.